talking about everything you have to do to get a government contract. And today we're going to switch gears, because I know you all will get government contracts, and talk about how you actually manage the contract after award. So lectures this week are going to be back and forth between what the government's doing and what we're doing. And the reason why I'm talking to you about what the government's doing is because they're monitoring you, they're putting reports together on you, they're documenting what you're up to. So I just want you to be aware of what their side of the house is. I haven't met you either. Hi, I'm Mary Ann.
Oh, I'm John. We met last
Oh, John, that's right. I'm sorry. You were sitting
This
back
is
there last time. Okay. So, a couple things to keep in mind. The RFP, request for proposal, plus any amendments that the government issues, plus our proposal, plus any updates we make to our proposal, plus any clarifications or deficiencies, plus discussions, negotiations, and the final proposal revision. All that taken together become the contract. So be careful what you write in your proposals, because it will come back to haunt you, right? You want to make sure that you are firmly committed to everything you're stepping up to, because quite frankly, and I keep wanting to make this point so that we're all aware, they could issue the RFP, you could issue your proposal, and it could be a done deal on a contract. They don't have to go through all these other steps. They can choose to go after these steps, or go through these steps, and most times they do go after these steps, but they don't have to. Again, all the more reason to get it right the first time. So there's a couple things that we're trying to balance here. The government cannot order. So when we think about that contract baseline, with all the products and all the services and all the prices, the thing to keep in mind is that the government cannot order anything unless it's on that contract baseline. The obverse is also true. We cannot deliver anything unless it's on the contract baseline. So that's not to say that once you put the contract in, it's cast in concrete. We can make contract modifications. We may have a brand new version of a product that comes out, and we want to put that on the contract. The government may need a new capability and ask us to add it to the contract. But all that is done through contract modifications. And once those contract modifications are done, then they get added to the contract baseline. Then the government can order, and then we can deliver. Any questions about that? That's an important concept. Okay. So what influences the contract? Why would we have to change the contract? Sometimes government regulations change. And these modifications, when the government regulations change, are really focused on unilateral type modifications. What's a unilateral modification? It means only one party has to sign it. Who do you think that might be? The government has to sign it, right? So if there's a change in the regulation that's happening up here, your agency is going to say you need to do this. Now, if it's typically those types of modifications wouldn't have any dollar impact to you. If they do have a dollar impact, then it would be a bilateral modification. They're not going to pull the rug out from you guys and say, here, you have to do this during contract award, and then after contract award, you have to do this. You can put together a proposal for how much extra it's going to cost you, and then you'll negotiate that. So that's one reason why a contract changes. There can also be tech changes. And the only thing I want to caution you on is just because it's good for you to change products doesn't mean the government's going for it. So let's say, for example, you sold software and you sold the government version 4 and it's a 5-year contract. You have to give the government pricing for that product for 5 years. And you can say, well, how am I supposed to do that? Our prices change every year. Well, that's your issue. You have to give them a price that you're committed to for 5 years. Now let's say in year 2, you go from version 4 to version 5. And so in your head, you're thinking, oh yeah, of course the government's going to want to pay more money for this and get more functionality, and this is going to be better for me because I don't have to support product, version 4 anymore. So you think about it all in those terms, and the government's like, no, we're happy with version 4, and you need to provide it for the rest of the contract. So always be aware that what you're proposing, you're going to have to live with for the duration. Now, you may choose to up your price in years 3, 4, and 5 because you know you're going to have modifications and you know it's going to be a higher priced item. And so you might want to say to the government, and And that's okay. Why is that okay? Because what you're saying to the government is, we would just like to do a swap out of product where you get the same or greater functionality. So let's make sure we understand this. When you want to change from version 4 to version 5, and you want to go from $100 to $125, the government has a choice to make. Do they want to go to version 5 or do they not? You're committed to provide version 4 for $100 the whole way through. But if in year 3, you change your price to, first year is 100, second year is 100, third year is 125, fourth year is 125, fifth year is 125, and in year 3, your next version comes out, you can go to the government and say, I have a no-cost modification that I would like you to accept, and it's to go from version 4 to version 5. And you'll see our year 3 price is $125. And we're going to give you greater functionality for the same price. Understand how that works? So always be aware that what you commit to, you're committed to for the duration. So make sure you make business decisions correctly to be able to handle that. Sometimes the government dollars change. You know, each administration does this kind of stuff with the budget, right? DHS is important, DHS isn't important. Energy is important, energy is not important, right? We're going through this every administration we have. So sometimes agencies that aren't in the president's priority, they lose their funding, or they lose some of their funding. So that's when the agency head, or OMB tells the agency head, you need to reduce your budget by 20%. And then that agency head needs to go to their programs and say, okay, each one of you cut your programs by 20%, or you cut yours by 20, and you cut yours by 40, and you cut yours by 10. They make those decisions. All that rolls down to us. We get told we're going to have to cut the budget by X%. So then we have to come back and say, okay, that contract baseline, we're no longer offering this service, or we're no longer doing this because you had a budget decrease, and we have to scale back accordingly. So that's another reason why it might happen. Statement of work changes. You know, especially in the technology field, we're constantly innovating with new and better ideas, and so technology, like, you know yourself, if you, I like small iPhones, and these iPhones keep getting bigger and bigger. Well, what happens is as newer technology comes out, guess what happens to mine? It starts to slow down, because Apple doesn't want to have to support 5 product generations. They only want to be able to, their preference would be to only support the latest one, but they know all their previous customers would get really ticked. But that's the way they manage us to get off the technology that we're comfortable with and the size that we like, and get us into these big kahuna phones, right? So, and pay more money for it. So technology changes. That would cause statement of work type changes to occur. So those are the reasons why we would have modifications. So the phases of the contract, we're going to break the contract down into 3 main pieces. We're going to talk about startup type activities, we're going to talk about performance type activities, and we're going to talk about shutdown. So startup is everything we need to get the contract up and running. Performance is everything we do on the contract, and then at the very end we actually have to shut down the contract through a formal process. So what are some of the characteristics of startup? Typically, as soon as you turn in your proposal, and while you're thinking about putting together your final proposal revision, it's a good idea to start thinking about what your contract's going to look like when you get awarded. So a good example is to say, okay, the government's going to, on day 1, the government's either going to issue me a delivery order telling me that I have to provide certain products to the government per the contract, or they're going to tell me I need to provide, they're going to give me a task order, and I'm going to have to provide services. And so the idea that we need to get in our head is, what happens next? Okay, the order comes in electronically, now what? Who needs to be notified? Who needs to review it? Who needs to make sure everything's on the contract baseline? Who needs to notify the subcontractors? How's this work going to get done? So think through that process, because if you have a good handle on that, you'll be good for contract startup. Keep in mind, in your proposal, you have written beautiful things about your processes, and you have talked about how you can start the contract on day 1 And you can hit the ground running, because you have to say things like that in order to win the contract, right? Because if you say, so I have to say a funny story. I was asked to help with the Obama Foundation library, the presidential library. And this company called me up and they said that the government it's not the government, it's like, this RFP is kind of, some things are government and some things are commercial, so it's this crazy hybrid in the middle and you're not it. And it's clear that they haven't written an RFP before, so it's, you know, who the hell knows what they want kind of thing. But it was really funny because the guy I was working with on this proposal effort, he had never done any government contracting before, and he'd never done a contract of this size. It's about $10 million. And so he called me up and he asked if I'd work with him. I said, yeah, sure. So we start working together, and literally the night before, he said that he woke his wife up at 1 o'clock in the morning, which I'm sure she was thrilled with. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? He was overwhelmed with how much the government asks for, or how much this group asked for. So this group is trying to digitize all of the president's records. But even though they're a foundation, and I'm sure that maybe a 501c kind of thing, they have to, because it's a presidential library, they have to pay attention to all the National Archive standards. So there's a whole bunch of federal regulations that they have to pay attention to. Some of them were really written for like artifacts that are like the Constitution, not the fact that Obama had everything digitized. Like, you know, he was an email, he was a, you know, Twitter kind of, or not, I don't know if he did Twitter as much, but, you know, he was definitely into technology. So there's a different, like, all those record things don't apply to him because he's in the digital age. But, you know, be that as it may. So so the guy's kind of, he goes, oh my God, I have to do floor drawings, and I have to give resumes, and I have to give past performance, and I have to give pricing, and I have all the things we've talked about, right? Because let's face it, you need that for a commercial contract, just like you do on a federal contract. So he was just kind of overwhelmed with life. So he says to me, I woke my wife up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just said to her, honey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write them a letter. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm new at this. I did the best I could. I'm sure there are things I'm submitting that aren't right. I'm sure there are regulations that you're talking about that I don't have any idea about. And then his wife is like, I can tell they have a very supportive relationship, right? Honey, he's quoting me, honey, yeah, that's a good approach, but maybe you might want to consider, and then she gives him her approach. And so after he finishes, I'm keeping my tongue, right, till the very end, and I wait for a pause in the conversation, and it seems like he wants something at this point, so I said, would you like my opinion? And he said, yes, I would. And I said, don't do any of that. You don't want to tell, why would you say, I'm your biggest risk vendor, here's all the things I don't understand about your proposal, or about your RFP, and here's my submission to you, right? So you always want to, I just went to a kickoff meeting yesterday, a contract I won, and the government said, we have 15 submissions. And she said that, and I said, thank you for the award. She goes, oh, no, you earned it. She said, but, I said, how many submissions you get? She said, 15. And she goes, there were some submissions that we didn't even know what they were putting in. Like it didn't even seem like it was a proposal response to their RFP. So when you think about what you're putting in, do the best job you can. Try to seek clarification. There's always a period of time on RFPs where the government will allow you to ask questions. And what messes up most contractors is they decide on day 11 to go after this deal, and all the questions were due on day 10. So as long as you stay on top of the RFP when it comes out and review it right away to see what your questions are, you can get those questions submitted and answered, and you can prepare your proposal accordingly. What messes up a lot of vendors is when they wait till the last minute. So you do have that time. So contract startup characteristics, it usually lasts about 6 months. The government expects the work to begin right away, right? We had this award yesterday. She said you could start this afternoon. So, it's a very quick turnaround when you win a contract. You need to get your team identified, so that's one of the things that you need to be thinking about when you have the time to, how many people are you going to need on this deal? And you will have had to figure out how many during your pricing proposal, right? Because you had to figure out what price to give the government, so you probably had a good sense as to how many people you would need to do that. You need to get your customer relationship established, and we'll talk about how the government establishes that relationship with you. You need to get your subcontract relationships established. So if this is ongoing supply, where you're always using the same vendors over and over again, you probably already have those relationships established. And this is just another one in the heap. But if you brought in brand new subcontractors, you've got to get those things worked out, because if you don't, they can come back to bite you. And if a subcontractor makes a mistake, it's your responsibility, right? Because you're the prime contractor. Any plans that you said in the proposal, like your project management plan, how you're going to manage subcontractors, maybe your task order plan, all those plans need to be initiated and kickstarted. You've got to figure out how to do deliverables. These are the actual reports that you turn into the government. Some contracts don't have any. Most of them have at least a status report that's due, but they tend to give you a strict format for how they want to see it. So you need to make sure that you know where the data is coming from and how it's going to get into this report, who's going to quality check the report, and then what leadership member is going to look at it to make sure you're not saying something that your management team wants to not say yet, or whatever that kind of relationship is. And then you need to start implementing your solution. Contract performance starts after contract initiation, and it's for the life of the contract. So from day one of the contract till the end date of the contract is contract performance. The government expects the work to be done according to the contract. Not, well, I proposed it this way, but I think I'm going to do it this way instead. If you do something like that, you need to get that approved by the government. The government expects you to follow your contract exactly the way it was written. The contract and all the associated work needs to be managed. So it's up to you to manage your people to make sure that this work gets done. And then team members shift to new positions, some off the contract and some are added to the contract and some need to be trained. So think about your workforce, right? You want to bring in some of your senior people initially to get things started. But then those senior people are going to need to roll off and go do other work, maybe other new contracts, and get them started. Which means you need to either bring in new people to the contract or even new people to your company. So you've got to get them trained on the contract, you've got to get them trained on your company, and you need to be able to roll them in. You also have to manage your customer relationships. Okay, so there are going to be times where the government doesn't give you the information you need at the right time. How are you going to manage around that? So let's say, for example, you turn in a deliverable and they're supposed to have 3 days to make any changes and get it back to you. And what happens if they don't give it back to you until 5 days? Are you going to hold their feet to the fire and say, okay, well, since you were 2 days late, I'm going to be 2 days late? Or are you going to try to work with them? But you have to be careful that you don't set precedent. I'll help you with this time. And they decide the same things about you. There's inevitably problems that occur on contracts. How are they going to handle it? They can't just say, hey, it's okay, because the government can't get they can't get nothing for nothing, right? So if they give you an extension of 3 days, they're going to expect either a decrement in the payment, so they're going to expect to be paying less, or they may hit you with liquidated damages as a way of, they can't just give you something like that. So if you bid a program manager that has 10 years experience, and when the new program manager comes in, they only have 9 years, they're going to expect a lower rate because of things like that. All your internal support groups need to be managed. So if you have, if engineering is doing a piece, or design is doing a piece, or manufacturing is doing a piece, you as the prime, not only are you managing all your subs, but you need to make sure all your internal groups are following the contract, because your own people could mess you up on a contract, and you don't want that to happen. You have all these routine processes that you put in place in initiation. They all need to be followed. And then the manager gets to a point, like I was running a contract that was in year 8 of a 10-year contract. And by that point, you don't have to look at every single transaction. I got to the point where I was just managing by exception. So all my people knew that if the answer was within these parameters, they could process it and I didn't have to see it. But if it was outside these parameters, I wanted to